February 1974. Mary Schlais was an art student who believed in the kindness of strangers. When her ride fell through, she decided to hitchhike from Minneapolis to an art show in Chicago. Someone picked her up along a snowy Wisconsin highway. Hours later, witnesses saw a young woman being thrown from a moving vehicle. Mary's body was found in a ditch, covered in stab wounds. For 50 years, her killer vanished into the American landscape. But in 2024, investigators discovered that one piece of evidence had been waiting all along to reveal the truth. Before we dive into this 50-year mystery, if true crime cases like this fascinate you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into America's most puzzling cold cases. Mary Schlais was 25 years old and full of dreams. An accomplished artist and equestrian from Minneapolis, she had planned to attend a Chicago art show that February weekend in 1974. The weather was brutal. Wisconsin was buried under heavy snow and bitter cold. But Mary was determined to make the trip. Dunn County Sheriff Dan Westland had spent decades studying Mary's final hours. Even now, nearly 50 years later, he could recite the timeline from memory. Mary's original ride had fallen through at the last minute, leaving her stranded but not defeated. She made the decision that would cost her life. She would hitchhike to Chicago. Mary was the kind of person who trusted people, Westland reflected during a recent interview. She believed in human goodness. That faith made her an easy target. On February 15, 1974, Mary stood beside Highway 25 near Elk Mound, Wisconsin, thumb extended toward passing traffic. The temperature was well below freezing, and snow continued to fall. She wore a winter coat and carried a small bag with her art supplies. Someone stopped for her. Later that evening, witnesses driving along the same stretch of highway reported seeing something horrifying. A young woman was thrown from a moving vehicle, her body hitting the snowy ground with devastating force. The car didn't stop. It accelerated away into the darkness, leaving Mary Schlais dying alone beside the road. Deputy Sheriff Tom Johnson was among the first responders to find Mary's body. She had been stabbed multiple times and left to die in the freezing cold. But it was clear that the attack hadn't happened where she was found. Mary had been murdered elsewhere, then transported to this remote location and dumped like garbage. This wasn't a robbery, Johnson observed as he processed the scene. Her purse was still with her, money untouched. This was personal violence, but we didn't understand why. The investigation into Mary Schlais' murder quickly expanded into one of Dunn County's largest manhunts. Sheriff's deputies interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses, tracking down every report of suspicious vehicles or unusual activity along Highway 25 that February evening. Detective Lieutenant James Morrison took charge of the case and found himself consumed by Mary's story. She wasn't just another victim. She was a talented artist whose work showed genuine promise. Her family described her as trusting, kind, and passionate about her art. Someone had destroyed all of that potential for reasons Morrison couldn't understand. The physical evidence was limited but tantalizing. Mary's body showed signs of a violent struggle. She had fought her attacker, leaving investigators hopeful that forensic evidence might eventually lead to an arrest. But in 1974, DNA analysis didn't exist, and the other evidence wasn't conclusive enough to identify a suspect. Years passed, then decades. Morrison retired, and younger detectives inherited Mary's case. The file grew thick with reports, interviews, and failed leads. Suspects were investigated and eliminated. Tips poured in from across the region, but none produced the breakthrough investigators desperately needed. Mary's sister never stopped believing that justice would eventually come. She contacted the sheriff's department regularly, asking about new leads, new techniques, anything that might finally solve her sister's murder. Each time, the answer was the same. The case remained active, but investigators had exhausted their options. Mary deserved better, her sister said during one of her calls to Detective Morrison. She was trying to live her dream, and someone took everything away from her. We just want to know who did this. By 2023, Mary Schlais had been dead for nearly 50 years. Her case file occupied an entire drawer in the Dunn County Sheriff's Office, filled with decades of investigation that had led nowhere. But advances in forensic science were about to change everything. Sheriff Kevin Bygd inherited Mary's case when he took office and made a decision that would finally bring her killer to justice. He reached out to Ramapo College in New Jersey, which had developed a cutting-edge genetic genealogy program led by a team of dedicated researchers. The college's genetic genealogy team was different from traditional forensic laboratories. They specialized in cases exactly like Mary's, cold cases where conventional DNA analysis had failed, but where trace genetic evidence might still exist. They had solved dozens of seemingly impossible cases using techniques that hadn't existed when Mary was murdered. Dr. Jennifer Podall, who led Ramapo College's forensic program, immediately recognized the potential in Mary's case. The evidence from 1974 had been carefully preserved by Dunn County investigators, and advances in DNA extraction might finally make it usable. The genetic genealogy team at Ramapo College worked methodically through the DNA profile extracted from Mary's hat. Using advanced genealogical databases, they constructed a family tree that led them to a specific lineage in Minnesota. The DNA belonged to someone with Scandinavian ancestry who had lived in the upper Midwest during the 1970s. After months of painstaking research, they identified their primary suspect, John Keith Miller, a man who had been living quietly in Minnesota for decades. Miller was now 84 years old and residing in an Owatonna assisted living facility. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no apparent connection to Mary Schlais. Sheriff Bygd felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as he prepared to confront Miller. After 50 years, Mary's family might finally get the answers they had been seeking. But would an 84-year-old man even remember events from 1974? If this investigation is as compelling for you as it is for us, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Cases like Mary's need to be remembered, and your engagement helps ensure these victim stories are never forgotten. On November 7, 2024, investigators arrived at the Owatonna assisted living facility where Miller had been residing for just 8 months. They found him in the common area, reading a newspaper and appearing completely at peace with the world. "Mr. Miller, we're here about Mary Schlais," Detective Westlund said quietly. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Miller's hands began to shake. His face went pale. The newspaper fell from his fingers. "I've been waiting for this day for 50 years, Miller whispered. What happened next stunned even experienced investigators who had worked dozens of cold cases. When presented with evidence that his DNA had been found on Mary's hat, John Miller didn't deny involvement. He didn't demand a lawyer. Instead, he began to confess to a crime he had carried as a secret for half a century. Miller told investigators that he had picked up Mary Schlais while she was hitchhiking that February evening in 1974. He claimed that he had made unwanted advances toward her during the ride. When Mary refused his advances and demanded to be let out of the car, a fight ensued. She fought back, Miller said, his voice barely audible. "I lost control. I never meant for it to happen, but once it started, I couldn't stop." Miller described stabbing Mary multiple times during the struggle, then driving with her body to the remote location where witnesses later saw him throw her from his vehicle. He had returned home, cleaned his car, and tried to forget what he had done. But 50 years of guilt had taken their toll. Miller admitted that Mary's murder had haunted him every day since 1974. He had moved several times, trying to escape the memory. He had avoided relationships, unable to trust himself around women. He had lived as a hermit, carrying the weight of his terrible secret. "I knew someday you would find me," Miller told investigators. "Part of me hoped you would." On November 7th, 2024, John Keith Miller was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Mary Schlais. At 84 years old, he became one of the oldest suspects ever arrested for a cold case murder in Minnesota history. Mary's family, now in their 70s and 80s themselves, finally received the closure they had sought for 5 decades. Her sister released a statement saying, "We don't want to forget that this is about justice for Mary and bringing her family closure." Mary can be remembered as an accomplished artist, equestrian, sister, and daughter. The case demonstrated the incredible power of genetic genealogy and the importance of preserving evidence, no matter how old or seemingly insignificant. A knit hat that investigators had barely noticed in 1974 became a key to solving Mary's murder 50 years later. Detective Westland, who had worked Mary's case for much of his career, reflected on the resolution. This case proves that we never give up on victims. Mary Schlais waited 50 years for justice, but she got it. That hat was her voice, speaking across 5 decades to tell us who killed her. Miller's confession also raised troubling questions about how many other crimes might have remained hidden for decades. If he had killed Mary Schlais in 1974, had there been other victims? Other families still searching for answers about missing daughters? As of late 2024, Miller awaits trial for Mary's murder. His confession has been recorded and preserved as evidence, ensuring that Mary Schlais will finally receive the justice that eluded her for 50 years. The art show Mary was traveling to attend in Chicago went on without her in February 1974. But her story and her killer's capture became a different kind of artwork, a testament to the persistence of investigators who refused to let a young woman's murder be forgotten and the power of science to give victims a voice even decades after their deaths. Subscribe, like, and comment if you want to see more cold cases where modern science brings justice to victims who waited decades to be heard. Because every victim deserves to have their story told, and every family deserves answers, no matter how long it takes.